3 days before Christmas, my SUV was packed so full of wrapped presents that I could barely see out the rear window. I had a pecan pie cooling in a travel carrier on the passenger seat, my late wife's famous sugar cookies tucked into a tin behind it, and two oversized stockings embroidered with my grandchildren's names. I was halfway to the interstate outside Scottsdale when my phone lit up on the dashboard. Ryan, I smiled before I answered. Hey son, I'll be in Denver tomorrow afternoon if the weather... Dad, his voice stopped me cold. Don't come home. I frowned thinking I'd heard him wrong. What? There was a long pause, then he said quietly, nobody wants you here this Christmas. For a second, all I could hear was the hum of my tires against the pavement. I don't understand. Ryan let out a tired sigh. Emily's parents are staying with us. The house is crowded. The kids already have too much going on. And, honestly, he hesitated. We just want one normal Christmas, without everyone feeling guilty. Guilty? You always pay for everything, Dad. Every dinner, every vacation, every surprise. It changes the atmosphere. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I never expected anyone to feel guilty. I know, but that's how it is. His words weren't angry. That almost made them hurt more. So, it'd be better if I stayed in Arizona. I think it's for the best. Another silence. I hope you understand. I swallowed. I do. Then I ended the call before either of us could say something we'd regret. I drove to the next exit, pulled into an empty grocery store parking lot, and sat there staring through the windshield while Christmas music drifted softly from the speakers. A little girl walked past, holding her father's hand, pointing excitedly at a giant inflatable snowman outside the store. I remembered Lily doing exactly the same thing when she was 4. I turned the engine off. For nearly 15 minutes, I didn't move. Then I opened the back of the SUV. One by one, I carried every present back into my house. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 68 years old, a retired CPA, and I've lived in Scottsdale, Arizona for almost 30 years. My wife Margaret died 6 Christmases ago after a long fight with cancer. People tell you time heals. It doesn't. It simply teaches you how to carry the weight without dropping it. Every December since she passed, I'd driven or flown to wherever Ryan and his family were living. Christmas wasn't really about gifts. It wasn't even about traditions. It was about hearing laughter in a house again, about not eating dinner alone. Margaret used to say, a full table fixes things medicine can't. I'd believed her. Maybe I still did. That evening, I unpacked everything. The bicycle stayed in the garage. The toy telescope went into the guest room. The handmade quilt Margaret had started before she became sick, I folded it carefully and placed it back inside the cedar chest. The house felt unbearably quiet. I wandered into our bedroom. Margaret's favorite knitted scarf still hung on the old oak coat rack. It hadn't moved in years. I picked it up. It still carried the faint scent of cedar from the closet. I guess it's just us this year, I whispered. On her bedside table sat the framed photo from our 40th anniversary trip to Sedona. She was laughing at something I'd said. I couldn't even remember the joke anymore. I only remembered the sound. Darp. I barely slept. By morning, the hurt had settled into something calmer. Not acceptance. Clarity. I've spent my entire career making decisions after looking at facts instead of emotions. This one deserved the same treatment. At 9 o'clock, I drove downtown to meet my attorney, Linda Morris. We'd known each other for over 20 years. She took one look at my face before setting her coffee down. What happened? My son asked me not to come for Christmas. She didn't interrupt. I explained everything. Every word. When I finished, she simply nodded. So she asked gently, what would you like to do? I thought about that for a long moment. I don't want revenge. She smiled faintly. I believe you. I just don't think I should keep pretending nothing changed. We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing paperwork. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. I updated beneficiaries on a few accounts. Removed emergency financial access that Ryan no longer needed. Canceled the automatic monthly transfers I'd quietly been sending for years to help with expenses. Stopped contributing to the vacation savings account I'd created for family trips. The education savings I'd built for Lily and Ethan remained untouched. That wasn't their fault. Never would be. Linda looked at me before I left. Daniel. Yes. You've taken care of everyone else for a very long time. She slid a brochure across the desk. It showed turquoise water beneath a bright Caribbean sky. A client canceled this cruise last week. 15 days. Leaves from Miami in 2 days. I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. You trying to get rid of me? I'm trying to remind you retirement wasn't supposed to feel like punishment. Back home, I called my financial advisor, then my insurance agent. Everything was handled before dinner. No scenes. No angry phone calls. No threats. Just quiet decisions. That evening, I opened the hall closet looking for my travel suitcase. Instead, my eyes landed on the small fireproof safe Margaret and I had bought years earlier. Inside were our wills, old family photographs, and a sealed envelope in Margaret's handwriting. For Daniel. I stared at it. I knew it had been there since the week before she died. She'd told me to read it only when I truly felt lost. For 6 years, I'd never touched it. My fingers rested lightly on the envelope. Not tonight. I closed the safe. Some things deserve the right moment. The next morning, I booked the Caribbean cruise. Miami. 15 days. No schedule except sunrise, ocean air, and whatever came next. Just before boarding my flight, my phone buzzed. Ryan, thanks for understanding, Dad. I looked at the message for several seconds. Then I locked my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and walked toward the gate without replying. Some conversations could wait. Others had already said everything that needed to be said. The first thing that hit me when I stepped out of the airport in Miami was the humidity. It wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, completely different from the dry December air back in Arizona. Palm trees swayed above the parking lot. People wore shorts. Christmas music drifted out of an open-air cafe where someone was sipping iced coffee. It felt wrong. Christmas wasn't supposed to smell like salt water. It was supposed to smell like pine tree cinnamon and Margaret's turkey roasting in the oven. As my shuttle headed toward the port, I caught myself thinking I still had time. One flight. That's all it would take. I could fly to Denver. Show up anyway. Maybe Ryan would apologize. Maybe the kids would come running out the front door yelling, "Grandpa." Maybe. I stopped myself. At 68, I'd lived long enough to know the difference between hope and bargaining. One was healthy. The other only delayed pain. The cruise terminal buzzed with families hauling luggage, newlyweds taking selfies, and retired couples who looked like they'd been making this trip every December for 20 years. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. I suddenly wasn't sure I did. Well, when I unlocked my cabin, I set my suitcase beside the bed and sat down without taking off my jacket. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of engines beneath the ship. I looked around. One bed, one chair, one balcony. It struck me harder than I'd expected. For 43 Christmases, I'd never traveled alone. Not once. Margaret had always packed too many sweaters. She'd always insisted on bringing Christmas cards we'd never mailed. She'd always teased me for arriving at airports 3 hours early. I laughed softly at the memory. Then without warning, I cried. Not loudly. Just enough for the tears to remind me she was still missing. 6 years hadn't changed that. So, a knock on the cabin door interrupted me. Housekeeping had delivered the wrong suitcase. The man carrying it was about my age, broad-shouldered, with silver hair, and the kind of face that suggested he'd spent most of his life outdoors. He looked at me, glanced at my red eyes, then pretended not to notice. "Guess we almost traded vacations," he said with a grin. I chuckled. "Mine wouldn't fit your wardrobe." He laughed. "I'm Frank." Daniel. Over the next couple of days, we kept running into each other. Breakfast. Walking deck 6. Coffee after dinner. Eventually, he told me he'd retired from the Phoenix Fire Department after 38 years. His wife had died 2 years earlier. "First Christmas without her, I stayed home," he said. "Worst mistake I ever made." "What happened?" "I spent the whole day waiting for somebody to knock on my door." He shrugged. "They didn't." His honesty made me appreciate him immediately. No self-pity. No dramatic speeches. Just facts. I understood facts. The second person I met was Susan. She joined our breakfast table one morning after asking if the empty chair was taken. She was 69, recently widowed and from Ohio. She smiled easily but spoke carefully like someone still learning how to carry silence. Halfway through breakfast, she stirred her coffee and said something that stayed with me. "I spent 40 years making sure everyone else had what they needed." Frank nodded. Susan smiled. "Last month, I bought myself flowers for the first time." Neither of us laughed. Because we understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes the smallest kindness feels the strangest when you've forgotten you're allowed to receive it. Christmas Eve arrived. The ship held a candlelight gathering on the upper deck. A choir sang familiar carols. Children chased one another beneath strings of white lights. I leaned against the railing watching the ocean disappear into darkness. Frank walked over carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Thought you might need this." "I appreciate it." He looked out toward the water. "You planning on calling your family tomorrow?" "I don't know." "You want my opinion?" "I suspect you're going to give it anyway." He laughed. "Darn right." He took a slow sip before speaking. "Don't spend your life chasing invitations from people who already know your address." I looked at him. He wasn't talking about Christmas. He was talking about dignity. Christmas morning arrived with a sunrise unlike anything I'd ever seen. The horizon slowly turned gold until the ocean looked like melted glass. People gathered quietly along the railings. Some hugged, some prayed, some simply watched. For the first time in years, nobody expected me to carve a turkey. Nobody expected me to write a check. Nobody expected me to fix anything. The feeling surprised me. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it wasn't loneliness anymore either. It was something lighter. Freedom mixed with grief. A strange combination. I thought Margaret would have understood. Nearly 2,000 miles away, Christmas wasn't going nearly as smoothly. Ryan didn't notice anything unusual until late morning. Emily was setting the dining room table when her phone buzzed. She frowned. The vacation account payment didn't go through. Ryan looked up. What? Our cabin deposit for spring break. Probably the bank. He opened the app. Nothing looked obviously wrong. Weird. A few minutes later, his credit card company texted him asking him to update an automatic payment. Another reminder followed from the utility company, then the landscaping service. By lunchtime, he was on hold with the bank. Emily watched him pacing around the kitchen. What are they saying? They don't see any fraud. So why are all these payments failing? I don't know. Neither of them noticed Lily standing quietly in the hallway. She listened to every word. Durham. That afternoon, while adults argued over banking apps and customer service numbers, Lily slipped upstairs carrying her tablet. She opened the messaging app. After staring at the blinking cursor for almost a minute, she typed, "Grandpa, did I do something wrong?" Back on the ship, I was sitting alone on my balcony watching flying fish skim across the water when my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it. Instead, I unlocked the screen. The message filled only 2 short lines. I read it once, then again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. There were 100 things I wanted to say. None of them felt right. So I set the phone down beside my chair and looked out across the endless blue water. Sometimes love isn't measured by the words you send. Sometimes it's measured by the ones you're afraid to. As the ship sailed quietly toward its next island, another call began ringing through my phone. Ryan. For several seconds, I simply watched his name flash across the screen. Then I pressed decline. Ryan called 3 more times that afternoon, then twice after dinner. The next morning, there were 2 voicemails. I listened to neither of them, not because I wanted to punish him, because for the first time in years, I realized every conversation between us happened on his schedule. When he needed advice, when something broke, when he wanted to run something by Dad. I couldn't remember the last time he'd called just to ask how I was doing. That thought hurt more than the words he'd spoken 3 days before Christmas. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and joined Frank for breakfast. He looked at me over a plate of scrambled eggs. "You look like a man who's arguing with himself." "I am. You gonna answer him?" "I don't know." Frank buttered his toast. "Here's the thing about apologies." I waited. They're only worth hearing if the other person has figured out what they actually did wrong. He pointed his fork at me. "If he's just calling because life got inconvenient, you'll know." I nodded. Deep down, I already knew he was right. Back in Denver, Ryan's Christmas vacation had turned into an unexpected scavenger hunt. By Monday morning, he'd spoken to the bank twice, his credit card company once, and an accountant who assured him there had been no fraud. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been hacked. Several automatic deposits had simply stopped. His phone rang. It was the property management company for the family cabin they rented every summer. "Mr. Carter, we're following up regarding the annual reservation deposit." Ryan frowned. "There must be a mistake." "I'm afraid there isn't. The automatic payment always goes through. It has every year." "So why didn't it?" There was a pause. "Because the account that funded it is no longer active." Ryan thanked the woman and hung up. Emily was watching from across the kitchen. "What? I don't understand." He opened an old folder on his laptop. The reservation paperwork was there. For years, he'd barely looked at it. Now his eyes stopped on one line. Funding account holder Daniel Carter. He blinked. "I forgot about that." Emily folded her arms. "You forgot your father paid for the cabin." He insisted. "He insisted," she repeated quietly, "or you stopped noticing." Ryan didn't answer. The rest of the afternoon became a slow, uncomfortable lesson in memory. Ryan searched through years of emails, not because he wanted to, because he needed to understand what had changed. What he found wasn't one dramatic discovery. It was hundreds of ordinary ones. Transfer received. Education contribution completed. Insurance premium paid. Summer camp tuition confirmed. Annual zoo membership renewed. Happy birthday, Lily. Don't tell Grandpa I spoiled you again. One after another, year after year. Most of them ended with exactly the same sentence. "No need to thank me. Just enjoy your family." Ryan leaned back in his chair. He honestly couldn't remember reading most of them. He'd skimmed them, filed them away, moved on with his day. His father had quietly become part of the background. Reliable, predictable, permanent, like electricity. You don't appreciate it until the lights go out. Emily sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I owe you something. Ryan looked over. I complained. What? When your dad would buy expensive gifts? She stared at the floor. I thought he was trying too hard. Ryan said nothing. I thought he made me feel like I could never contribute enough. She took a slow breath. But I never wanted him excluded. I know. No, she shook her head. I need you to hear me. I never asked you to tell him not to come. Ryan closed his eyes. I know. You made that decision. He rubbed both hands across his face. I thought. His voice faded. What? I thought giving everyone some space would make things easier. Emily looked at him with a sadness he'd rarely seen. You always choose the conversation that's easiest today. He frowned. What does that mean? It means you've spent years avoiding uncomfortable moments. She wasn't angry. If anything, she sounded disappointed. You let your dad keep paying because saying no would have been awkward. You let my parents criticize him because correcting them would have been awkward. You told yourself everyone would be happier if he stayed home because calling them out would have been awkward. She looked directly into his eyes. Easy choices have been costing you the people who love you. Ryan had no defense, because she was right. Upstairs, Lily walked into Ethan's room carrying a shoebox. What are you doing? Her little brother asked. She opened it carefully. Inside were birthday cards, postcards, photos, little souvenirs Grandpa had brought back from road trips. A tiny wooden cactus, a pressed leaf from Yellowstone, a keychain shaped like the Grand Canyon. He always remembers us, she whispered. Ethan looked around the room. Why didn't Grandpa come? Lily shrugged. Dad said he wanted to stay home. She didn't believe it anymore. Neither did Ethan. That evening, Ryan drove across town alone. There was one place he hadn't thought about visiting. His father's storage unit. Daniel had rented it years ago after downsizing from the family home. Ryan still had a key. Inside were neatly labeled shelves, Christmas decorations, camping gear, boxes of old tax records. Everything looked exactly the way his father would have organized it. Precise, orderly. Near the back stood a cedar chest Ryan hadn't opened since helping his parents move. He lifted the lid. Inside lay quilts, photo albums, Margaret's knitting supplies. Resting on top was a leather journal. He recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. The first page wasn't a diary. It was a note. Ryan, if you're reading this someday, it means life has moved faster than any of us expected. Please promise me one thing. Take care of your father. He's stronger than he'll ever admit, but loneliness sneaks up quietly. He'll never tell you when he needs company. He'll tell you he's fine. Don't believe him. Make time anyway. Love, Mom. Ryan couldn't breathe. He sat down on the concrete floor holding the journal with both hands. He wasn't crying because his father had stopped paying bills. He was crying because he'd broken the one promise his mother had asked of him. Without even realizing he'd done it. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Ryan booked the first flight he could find to Miami. The cruise itinerary was easy enough to locate online. The ship would return to port in 3 days. He stared at the confirmation email, then picked up his phone one more time. This time when he called, I answered. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ryan whispered, Dad, I looked out across the moonlit ocean. Yes, I think I've been seeing you for what you did. He stopped. Instead of who you are. I closed my eyes. The words landed somewhere deep inside me. But they weren't enough. Not yet. I'll be in Miami, he said quietly. I know. You do. I had a feeling. Another silence stretched between us. Then I said the only thing that felt honest. Safe flight. I ended the call before either of us could say anything else. 3 days earlier, my son had asked me not to come home. Now he was crossing the country to find me. I wasn't sure what would happen next. But for the first time since that phone call in Arizona, I believed the next conversation might finally be about something more important than money. The ship docked in Miami just after 8 on a bright December morning. From my balcony, I watched tugboats ease us toward the terminal, while passengers gathered their luggage and traded hugs with people they'd only met 2 weeks earlier. Funny how strangers can become familiar when life slows down. Frank found me outside the elevator with his duffel bag over one shoulder. So he said, "What's waiting for you?" I smiled faintly. "I honestly don't know." He stuck out his hand. "No matter what happens today, remember something." "What's that?" "You survived Christmas." I laughed. "I suppose I did." He nodded. "And don't settle for less respect in January than you demanded in December." We shook hands. Then he disappeared into the crowd. I never saw him again. Some people are only meant to walk beside you for one stretch of the road. That doesn't make them any less important. The volunteer center was only a few miles from the port. During the cruise, Susan had mentioned it to me after seeing a flyer. They always need extra hands after Christmas, she'd said. Margaret and I had volunteered at food banks back in Arizona for years. It seemed like the right place to spend my first morning back on land. The building wasn't fancy. Just a converted community center serving veteran seniors living alone and anyone who needed a hot meal. By 10 o'clock, I was wearing a plastic apron slicing bread beside an Army veteran named Carl, who insisted on telling terrible jokes every 5 minutes. "You know why retired accountants make bad poker players?" he asked. I smiled. "I'm almost afraid to ask. They always show their hand." He laughed before I could. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed ordinary conversations. Nobody here knew my bank balance. Nobody cared. They only wanted another pair of hands. For the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Around noon, someone touched my shoulder. I turned. Ryan stood a few feet away. He looked exhausted. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes red from lack of sleep. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he quietly said, "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Ryan." He glanced at the serving line. "I've been looking everywhere." I figured. "I called the cruise line. They wouldn't tell you anything." They didn't. A faint smile crossed my face. "So how'd you find me?" "Susan." I couldn't help laughing. "She always did like talking." Ryan looked down. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." I set the tray of bread on the counter. "I'm working." "I know. I'd like to finish." He nodded immediately. "I'll wait." He didn't argue. He didn't push. He simply picked up another apron from a nearby shelf. A volunteer looked over. "You here to help?" Ryan answered before I could. "If you'll have me." The woman smiled. "Grab some gloves." Without another word, my son stepped beside me and began carrying trays to the dining tables. For the next hour, we barely spoke. We didn't need to. Actions were finally doing the talking. An elderly Marine in a wheelchair stopped Ryan as he cleared empty plates. "Son?" "Yes, sir." "You missed a spot." Ryan looked confused. The veteran pointed toward a table. "Your dad already cleaned that one." Ryan smiled sheepishly. "I'll catch up." The old Marine chuckled. "Good luck." I pretended not to hear. After lunch, most of the volunteers gathered in the multi-purpose room for coffee and pie. One of the coordinators, a cheerful woman named Angela, tapped a spoon against her mug. "We have someone visiting from Arizona who spent his Christmas serving others instead of sitting on a beach." Everyone laughed. She looked at me. "Daniel, would you mind saying a few words?" I almost refused. Public speaking had never bothered me during my career, but this felt different. More personal. Ryan quietly took a seat in the back of the room. I walked to the front, looked around, then spoke. When I was younger, I thought providing for the people I loved was the best way to show them I cared. A few heads nodded. I worked long hours. I solved problems. I paid bills before anyone had to ask. I don't regret any of that. I paused. But this Christmas taught me something I should have learned years ago. I folded my hands. If people only notice you when you're fixing something or paying for something, eventually you begin to wonder whether they'd still save you a seat if you arrived empty-handed. The room fell completely still. My wife used to tell me that every person deserves a place at the table simply because they're family. I smiled at the memory. Not because of what they bring, not because of what they spend, just because they're loved. I looked around the room one last time. This morning I realized something. Every volunteer here offered me a chair. Nobody asked what was in my wallet. They only asked whether I wanted coffee. Soft laughter rippled through the room. I think that's the kind of family we're all hoping to find. The applause wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It felt genuine. People slowly drifted back to cleaning up. Ryan stayed where he was. When the room finally emptied, he walked over. "I've been rehearsing what to say." "I imagine that. But nothing sounds big enough." "It probably isn't." He nodded. "I deserve that." I studied his face. He looked older than he had 4 days earlier. Not because of time, because of understanding. "Dad," I read Mom's letter. My chest tightened. "What letter?" "The one in her journal." I didn't answer. I broke my promise. His voice cracked. "I didn't leave you alone all at once. I did it little by little. Every time I assumed you'd understand. Every time I let you take care of something. Every time I chose the easier conversation." He wiped his eyes. "I'm ashamed of that." I believed him. That was the difficult part. Believing him wasn't the same as being ready. "I forgive you," I said quietly. His shoulders sagged with relief. Then I added, "But forgiveness isn't the same as pretending nothing happened." He nodded slowly. "I know. I need time. I'll give you all the time you need." I don't want visits motivated by guilt. You shouldn't. I don't want phone calls because you're afraid I'll stop loving you. His eyes filled again. I won't. When you come see me next, I smiled gently. Come because you actually want to have breakfast with your old man. A shaky laugh escaped him. I'd like that. So would I. We walked outside together. The Florida sun was warm on our faces. For several minutes, we simply stood beside the river watching boats pass by. Finally, Ryan asked, "Where are you staying tonight?" I picked up my suitcase. Haven't decided. He looked surprised. I figured you'd have reservations. I smiled. I've spent most of my life making plans for everyone else. I slipped my sunglasses on. I think I'll see where the day takes me. Ryan nodded. For the first time in years, he didn't try to solve the moment. He simply walked beside me. And somehow, that felt like the beginning. The hardest part of rebuilding trust isn't the apology. It's what happens after everyone goes home. People like to think healing arrives in one big moment. A heartfelt speech, a long hug, tears, forgiveness. Real life doesn't work that way. Real life asks the same question over and over again. Will you show up today? About a month after Miami, my phone rang on a Saturday morning. Ryan. This time I answered without hesitation. Morning, Dad. Morning. What are you doing? I looked out the kitchen window, trying to convince myself it's warm enough to wash the truck. He laughed. It isn't. You called just to insult my judgment? No. A pause. I wondered if you'd like to have breakfast over video. I smiled. I'd like that. There wasn't a dramatic conversation. No speeches. No crying. We talked about football, the weather, whether pecan pie was better than pumpkin, Lily's science project, Ethan losing another baseball glove, 45 ordinary minutes. When we hung up, I realized something. It was the first conversation we'd had in years that wasn't about solving a problem. By March, those Saturday breakfasts had become a habit. Sometimes Ryan called. Sometimes I did. Nobody kept score. Emily started joining us now and then. One morning, she looked straight into the camera and said, "Daniel, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "I do." She took a breath. "I let myself become uncomfortable with your generosity instead of asking why you gave so much." I nodded. "I should have talked to you." "We both should have." She smiled sadly. "I miss Margaret." "So do I. I think she would have told all of us to stop being stubborn." I laughed. Without question. For the first time in a long while, talking to my daughter-in-law felt easy again. Not perfect, just honest. In April, my doorbell rang at 8 on a Friday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Ryan was standing there in faded jeans, work boots, and a baseball cap. Behind him sat a pickup truck loaded with lumber. "What happened?" I asked. He grinned. "You mentioned your back porch felt a little soft?" "I did." "So," he shrugged. "I took a long weekend." "You drove all the way from Denver." 13 hours. I looked at him. "That's a long drive." "So was yours." He didn't have to explain what he meant. For years, I'd crossed states to see my family. Now he'd crossed them to see me. We spent the next 3 days replacing rotten boards, repainting the railing, arguing over which baseball team had the better chance that season, and eating hamburgers from the diner Margaret and I used to visit. Not once did we mention Christmas. We didn't need to. The porch said enough. A few weeks later, Lily and Ethan came for the first time since everything happened. The moment they climbed out of the car, Lily wrapped both arms around me. "I'm sorry I thought you didn't want to come." I hugged her tightly. "Oh, sweetheart. I should have called." "You had nothing to apologize for." Ethan looked up at me. "Can we still build the birdhouse?" I smiled. "I already bought the wood." His eyes lit up. "Really? I had a feeling you'd ask." That afternoon, we filled the backyard with sawdust laughter and several very crooked nails. It was perfect. Early that summer, I met with Linda again. This time, not because something had fallen apart, because something finally felt steady. "I'd like to set up an education trust for Lily and Ethan." She smiled. "I thought you might. I want it structured differently this time." "How so?" "No monthly gifts. No automatic payments. When they're ready for college or trade school or whatever path they choose, they'll have it. And until then," I smiled, "they get a grandfather." Linda laughed. "I think that's the better investment." So did I. As the year moved along, I found myself building a life that wasn't centered on waiting for the phone to ring. I joined a classic car club and finally restored the 1967 Mustang I'd promised myself I'd finish after retirement. I started volunteering every Wednesday morning at a senior resource center. A few times each month, I had coffee with Frank whenever he happened to be passing through Arizona. We never planned it very far in advance. One of us would call the other and say, "You free?" Most of the time, the answer was yes. Susan mailed me flowers on my birthday with a note that made me laugh out loud. About time someone bought these for you. I kept the card. Life wasn't replacing my family. It was reminding me that family doesn't have to carry the whole weight of your happiness. The following December arrived faster than I expected. I decorated the house the same way Margaret always had. White lights, simple wreath. The old ceramic angel she'd insisted belonged on top of the bookshelf instead of the tree. Some traditions deserve to stay exactly as they are. On Christmas Eve, I was rolling out pie dough when I heard tires crunch across the gravel driveway. I looked through the kitchen window. A familiar pickup truck pulled in, then another vehicle behind it. The front door opened before I reached it. Dad, Ryan stood there holding a warm pecan pie in both hands. I used Mom's recipe. You remembered it. Emily laughed. He made 3 before getting it right. Behind them, Lily carried a worn cardboard box. I found these in our attic. She opened it. Inside were old Christmas ornaments Margaret had painted with the kids years ago. Tiny handprints, snowmen with crooked smiles, a little wooden star that still had glitter glued to one corner. My throat tightened. I thought they belonged here, Lily whispered. They do. Ethan looked up at me. Grandpa, yeah, we're staying until Sunday. I smiled. I was hoping you would. Ryan hesitated for just a second. Then he quietly said, we didn't come because we felt like we had to. I know. We came because this is where we wanted to be. For a moment, nobody moved. Then I stepped aside and opened the door a little wider. Well, I said dinner's getting cold. The kids hurried inside. Emily followed carrying bags from the truck. Ryan lingered on the porch. He looked around the house, then back at me. Thanks for giving us another chance. I rested a hand on his shoulder. Just don't waste it. I won't. This time, I believed him. The worst Christmas of my life turned out to be the beginning of the most peaceful year I'd known since Margaret passed away. I learned that love and generosity are beautiful gifts, but neither should become the price of belonging. The people who truly care about you will eventually find their way to your table, not because of what you provide, but because of who you are. If this story reminded you of someone you love, don't wait for the perfect moment to call them. Sometimes a simple conversation today can spare years of regret tomorrow.